Hello, I'm Ms. Mattie. My daughter said something at Thanksgiving that hit me like a brick. You do nothing, Mom. Can you imagine? After all the years of silence, all the sacrifices, I had finally had enough. You see, that wasn't just a slap in the face. It was the moment I realized I'd been carrying everyone's burdens for far too long. But that Thanksgiving, everything changed. I didn't stay quiet this time. I stood up. But what happened next? Well, you won't believe it. Was it too late for my daughter to ever see me differently? Or was this the point of no return? Stay with me, because this story is far from over. Thanksgiving was always supposed to be a time of warmth, a time to gather, to be grateful for the blessings we had. But tonight, as I set the table in the dimly lit kitchen, I couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in my chest. The house, once filled with laughter and the comforting smell of my cooking, now felt more like a museum of memories. The plates were neatly arranged, the turkey perfectly roasted, and the stuffing just the right texture. Yet something was missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I looked over at the family portraits hanging on the wall. There was a time when my children would gather around the table with excitement, their faces glowing with joy and pride in the meals I made. But over the years, that warmth had dimmed, and in its place was a growing distance. Venice, my oldest daughter, seemed to be at the center of it all. Once my pride, now she barely acknowledged my existence, let alone my sacrifices. I adjusted the centerpiece, forcing a smile. The turkey was a work of art, the gravy just right. Yet I couldn't help but wonder if any of them would notice. Would they see the years of work and love I had poured into this family? Or was I just the woman who cooked their meals and cleaned their messes? The reality of it all hit me like a heavy weight. My children had grown, and with their growth, they had left me behind. The table was set. I stood back and surveyed the room that had once been full of joy and togetherness. Now it felt cold, even with the heat from the stove warming the space. The silence between us all was thick, a heavy curtain I couldn't ignore. The house was decorated, the lights twinkled, and the scent of holiday food filled the air, but none of it seemed to matter anymore. I sat at the head of the table, waiting for my family to arrive. The years had made me wise, but they had also made me tired of pretending. Tired of keeping the peace. I'd been the one to sacrifice for years, putting their needs before mine. But this Thanksgiving felt different. I could feel something shifting inside me. I was done being invisible. The sound of the front door opening brought me back to reality. One by one, they filed in. Venice, her husband, the kids, and my son Malik. It was as if they were going through the motions, barely acknowledging each other as they took their seats at the table. There was no warmth, no eagerness to catch up, just silence, filled only by the clinking of utensils and the occasional forced laugh. But then, Venice, my daughter, said it. The words that felt like a slap to my face. "You do nothing, Mom. You're just sitting there. I'm the one taking care of everything. You can watch the kids while I go off on my trips." I froze. It wasn't the first time she had undermined me, but this felt different. This was Thanksgiving. This was supposed to be a time for family, for gratitude, and she had just dismissed me, humiliated me in front of everyone. I could feel the sting of her words deep in my chest. She was right about one thing, though. She had been taking on a lot. But it wasn't just that. It was the fact that she had no appreciation, no respect for all I had done, for all I still did for her. For a moment, I was paralyzed. The weight of years of being unnoticed, of being taken for granted, threatened to crush me. But then, something inside me snapped. I had spent my life taking care of everyone else, always putting myself last. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for a change. The room felt like it was closing in around me, but I remained silent. The years of holding everything inside, of biting my tongue had become too much. Venice's words echoed in my mind. "You do nothing." I looked around the table. Everyone else was pretending like nothing had happened, as if this was just another dinner. But it wasn't. It wasn't just another dinner. This was the moment I realized that I could no longer be the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who sacrificed and gave without ever asking for anything in return. I thought of the times I had stood up for others, times when I fought for justice, but never for myself. This time, though, something was different. I wasn't going to let this slide, not anymore. But what would I say? How could I respond? I had been silent for so long. The thought of confrontation filled me with dread, but the thought of continuing to let them disrespect me, let them treat me like I didn't matter, was worse. I sat back, my hands trembling slightly as I folded my arms on the table. The silence grew louder with every passing second. I could feel my heart racing, but I didn't speak. I just watched as Venice continued talking, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. The turkey, once the centerpiece of the meal, felt like a cruel joke. The stuffing, so carefully prepared, tasted like dust in my mouth. This wasn't about the food anymore. This was about something deeper, something I couldn't ignore any longer. The table, once a symbol of family unity, was now just a place for pretense. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. My family had drifted away from me, and I had let it happen. But I wouldn't let them continue to take me for granted. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the urge to speak up, to say something that might change everything. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. But in my heart, I knew that things had to change. I had spent so many years being the one who held everything together. I had been the one to make sacrifices, to be the strong one. But now, it was time to be strong for myself. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe it's time to stop being the silent one," I whispered to myself as I cleared the table. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a decision I was only beginning to understand. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, too quiet, but the stillness wasn't the comforting kind. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I had come to expect after a long day of cooking and cleaning. No, this was the kind of quiet that made your bones ache. I could feel it in my bones. A quiet storm, a brewing tension inside me that I couldn't shake. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of Venice's words still ringing in my ears. "You do nothing, Mom." The words felt like a slap across my face. They were sharp, and they cut deeper than I'd like to admit. I had spent years trying to hold this family together, giving every piece of myself, yet in that one sentence, Venice had reduced everything I had done to nothing. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, as if I was the one who had failed her. For the longest time, I let her, and the rest of them, get away with it. I kept quiet. I put up with their dismissiveness, their disregard for everything I had done, all in the name of family. But this was different. I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. I got up from bed, slowly, feeling the weight of the years in my bones, the weight of silence, of all the times I had swallowed my anger, my frustration, just to keep the peace. But what peace had I kept? The peace of a woman who was ignored, who was expected to be invisible. I was done with that. I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, my mind running through every scenario. I could feel the conflict inside me. I had always been the silent one, the one who never made waves, who kept things calm, who put everyone else first. But now, I wasn't sure I could keep doing that. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront Venice. But the question was, how? How could I approach her without it turning into a fight? I wasn't sure I could do it the way I always did, by letting it go, by swallowing my hurt. This time, I had to speak my mind. This time, I had to stand up for myself. I picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed Venice's number. It rang a few times before she picked up, her voice flat and uninterested. "What is it, Mom?" she asked, clearly distracted. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday, about what you said at dinner." There was a pause on the other end. "What, Mom? You're still going on about that? I told you, I don't have time for these talks." Her dismissiveness made my blood boil, but I held it in. "Venice, I don't want to argue. I just need you to listen. I don't like how you spoke to me. I'm not your servant, and I'm not invisible. I've given so much to this family, and I don't feel like you appreciate it." There was another long silence, and I could almost hear her rolling her eyes on the other end of the line. "Oh, please, Mom. You're always making a big deal out of nothing. You've always been like this." That was the moment I knew. I knew that this wasn't about just one comment. It was about years of being disregarded, years of being invisible to the very people I had spent my whole life caring for. And that realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I kept my voice steady, even though my insides were on fire. "I'm not making a big deal, Venice. I'm telling you how I feel. I've spent my whole life doing for you, doing for all of you. But I've had enough. I'm not going to keep quiet anymore. I need you to respect me. I need you to understand that I matter." She scoffed. "You matter. You've been telling me how hard you've worked your whole life. But guess what, Mom? The world doesn't care. You're old-fashioned, irrelevant. I'm the one dealing with the kids, with my job, with everything. You're not even helping. You just sit there." That hurt. I felt it like a punch in the stomach. All these years of sacrifice, and Venice saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. But I refused to let her words destroy me. I let the silence stretch between us, giving myself a moment to gather my thoughts. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. I wasn't going to keep putting up with being invisible. I took a breath and said, "Maybe you're right, Venice. Maybe I am old-fashioned. But that doesn't mean I don't deserve respect. And if you can't give me that, then maybe it's time we stop pretending everything's fine. Because it's not." The phone call ended, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty cup in front of me. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and I could feel a mix of relief and fear coursing through me. I had done it. I had finally spoken up for myself. But what would happen next? Would Venice understand? Would she even care? I didn't know. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to figure it out. I had spent too many years doing that. It was time for me to take control of my own story. I sat down at the kitchen table, my thoughts racing. What now? I thought. What comes next? And that's when it hit me. I had to make it clear to my children how I felt, how much I had given, and how little I had gotten in return. So I decided to write a letter to Venice and the rest of them, explaining everything I had been holding inside for all these years. I spent hours writing, rewriting, making sure every word captured the pain, the frustration, and the strength I had felt for so long. By the time I sealed the envelope, my hands were shaking, but my heart was lighter. I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I was done being silent. I mailed the letter and sat back in my chair. There was no turning back now. I had spoken my truth. A few mornings later, I awoke to the same quiet house, but it felt heavier now. The walls seemed to press in, as though reminding me I had crossed a line. The silence after having finally stood up to Venice was not peaceful. It was laced with tension. I lay in bed, trying to feel the shift inside me. The pain from that conversation still echoed, but so did a new pulse of purpose. Something inside me had changed. I could no longer pretend that nothing mattered. The confrontation had awakened something I had long buried. I knew this day would bring consequences, but I refused to shrink back into the background. This time, I would follow through on what I had begun. Later that afternoon, a text arrived. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow noon at the corner cafe. Fix the mess you caused." Venice's message felt casual, but the tone was loaded. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Had she really called me out like that? My heart beat fast. I wanted to delete the message, pretend it never came, but I didn't. I held on to it. The confrontation was no longer only in my mind, it had taken physical form. I typed a short response. "I'll be there." Then I set my phone aside, hands trembling. The consequences of the confrontation hadn't ended, they were just beginning. When I arrived at the small cafe the next day, my palms were sweaty. The place was quiet, mid-afternoon lull, ambient chatter in the background. I found Venice already seated by a window, arms crossed, face tight with something like impatience. I sat across from her in silence. She didn't start with pleasantries. She said, "You came. Good. But don't get it twisted. This is not about you being hurt. This is about how your bitterness has spilled over." Her voice was cold and sharp. I looked at her and let her words hang. I said, "This isn't bitterness. This is truth. You hurt me when you dismissed me in front of everyone. I deserve more from you, from all of you." Venice scoffed. "You're making this bigger than it is. You live in the past. You don't grasp what I deal with. Kids, career, stress. I can't babysit your emotions." Her tone was dismissive, but I felt each word like salt. I remained calm, holding back tears, holding back the anger. I reminded her of all I'd done to support her, her siblings, this home. "I've never asked you to carry my burdens," I said softly, "but I deserve respect. I deserve to be seen." She leaned in. "Seen? You had decades to speak up. Why now?" The room felt tight. The tension thickened. I inhaled, measured my words. This wasn't the moment to shout and burn bridges. It was the moment to show strength. As she listed everything she thought I lacked, understanding, flexibility, relevance, I felt the weight of years behind me. My body tensed, but I refused to lash out. I let her say what she would. And when she paused, I said, "Maybe I was quiet too long. But I'm not silent anymore. If you think I'm dramatic, fine. But I will never again let you treat me like I'm nothing." Her surprise was evident. She didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy and raw. I saw in her eyes the realization that this was not a negotiation. This was a stand. I felt something shift, a tension break, a charge pass between us. After that meeting, I walked home slowly. The air felt crisp. I clutched my purse, my thoughts racing. I passed familiar streets, faces I knew, and I felt older but stronger. At home, I sat in the living room, turning over what had happened. A sense of clarity settled in. Yes, there would be fallout. Yes, relationships might fray, but I couldn't turn back. The moment demanded new boundaries, new strength. I reached for my phone and began drafting a message to Venice, to place the distance where respect needed to grow. I hesitated, then typed, "Until you can see me for who I am, I can't remain like nothing changed. I hope one day you'll understand." I paused, reread it, then hit send. My chest felt lighter. I leaned back, exhaled. For the first time, I sensed that speaking my truth wasn't irresponsible. It was necessary. The storm may be coming, but I'm no longer afraid to face it head on. The days after that conversation with Venice were like walking on eggshells. I couldn't shake the weight of the silence that filled my house, a silence that felt thicker now, more suffocating. Each passing day seemed to echo the disappointment and anger that lingered from the dinner table. My thoughts constantly raced back to that moment. Her words, so cutting, so dismissive. I had never felt so invisible. But now, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. I had to keep moving forward, even though the path felt uncertain. That evening, I sat in the living room, the soft hum of the TV barely registering as I lost myself in thought. My fingers gripped the armrest, and I stared at the blank walls as memories of better times, times when I was valued, flashed through my mind. I had sacrificed so much, and for what? To be treated like a ghost in my own home? To be ignored by the very people I had raised, loved, and cared for? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Venice, this was about me. It was about standing up for myself, about demanding respect. The quiet woman I had been, the one who let things slide and smiled through the hurt, was gone. She had been replaced with someone stronger, someone who was ready to fight for her worth. I thought about what would happen next. A family event was coming up, and I knew that I would have to face Venice again. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. The idea of confronting her again made my insides churn, but it also fueled something else, a quiet, simmering determination. This time, I wasn't going to back down. A few days later, that moment came. We were all gathered at my niece's house for a family barbecue. I felt the usual tension in the air, a kind of undercurrent that everyone tried to ignore. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend. Venice was there, of course, her attitude as dismissive as ever. The conversation started innocently enough, but I could feel it building. She took another jab at me, this time about how I was just sitting there, letting the kids run wild. Something inside of me snapped. I stood up slowly, a deep breath filling my chest. The words came out before I could stop them. "You don't get to treat me like this anymore, Venice," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've given you everything. And this is how you repay me?" I could feel the weight of my own words, each one carrying the years of frustration I had kept locked away. The room went still, and I saw the shock in Venice's eyes. She tried to brush me off, like she always did, but this time I wouldn't let her. "I'm done with being ignored. I'm done with being invisible in my own family. You don't get to talk to me like that anymore. You need to understand that." Venice's face flushed with anger, but I could see something else there too. Fear. I wasn't the woman she thought she could walk all over anymore. I wasn't the woman who would quietly accept her disrespect. The silence between us grew thick, and for a moment I thought she might say something else, but she didn't. She just looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in shock. The others in the room had gone silent too, unsure of what to say. But I didn't care anymore. I was done living in their shadows. I was done shrinking myself to make them comfortable. Later that night, as I sat in my room, the weight of what had happened started to settle in. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the familiar tug of guilt. But there was something else too. A strange, liberating sense of peace. I had done it. I had finally spoken up. And though it felt like I might have just shattered something important, a part of me knew that it had to happen. For too long, I had allowed them to take me for granted, and I couldn't let that continue. As I sat there, I thought about my mother. She had always told me to stand tall, to never let anyone make me feel small. And yet, I had spent so many years allowing myself to be belittled. But not anymore. I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my voice, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone silence me again. The next day, I took a moment to myself. I had decided that the next step would be to set boundaries, to make sure I was heard, not just by Venice, but by everyone. I wasn't going to tolerate disrespect in my own home anymore, and that meant taking control. I spent the morning drafting a message, my fingers shaking slightly as I typed. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. When I finished, I read it over. Until you show me the respect I deserve, I think it's best we take a step back. I can't keep doing this. I've given you all I had, but I need to take care of myself now. I paused before hitting send. This was it. There was no turning back. I hit send, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a declaration of my worth, a declaration of who I was and who I would no longer be. The storm was coming. I knew that. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to face it. The days following the confrontation were both quiet and deafening at once. I could feel the storm inside me, gathering force with every passing hour. The weight of my decision to stand up, to no longer let my family treat me as invisible, was heavy, but it came with something unexpected, a sense of power. The house, once filled with chatter and laughter, now felt like a shell of what it had been. Silence hung thick in the air, a constant reminder of the rift that had formed between me and my children. I'd made my stand, and now I was waiting for the fallout. Sitting alone in the living room, I couldn't help but replay the conversation over and over in my head. Was it the right choice? Had I ruined everything? The quiet of the house seemed almost suffocating, pressing in on me. It wasn't just Venice's cold words that hurt. It was the years of neglect, of giving everything to my children and being met with indifference. I had raised them, nurtured them, loved them. And for what? To be treated like an afterthought. But even as these thoughts tried to pull me under, I couldn't deny the flicker of something else, a tiny spark of hope. This was the first time in years that I had taken control of my own life. It was messy and it hurt, but I was finally standing up for myself. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to walk it. I remember sitting there, my hands clenched, staring out the window at the quiet neighborhood. I felt isolated, cut off from the world I had built for so long. The silence in the house wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of connection. My family, especially Venice, had pulled away, and I didn't know if I could bridge that gap. The thought of trying to heal what had been broken seemed impossible. But then, as I sat there, the phone rang, cutting through the stillness. I picked it up, my heart skipping when I saw the name on the caller ID. It was Grace, my old friend from church. Mattie? Her voice was warm, full of familiarity and comfort. How are you holding up, girl? I let out a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. I'm okay, Grace, but it's been hard. I finally said something to Venice, and now it feels like everything's falling apart. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that told me Grace was choosing her words carefully. You did the right thing, you know that, right? I closed my eyes, her words sinking in. It doesn't feel like it, I admitted, feeling the sting of her silence, the way Venice had shut me out, the way the whole family seemed to be drifting further away. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't going to feel good right away. You've spent so many years bending yourself, giving. When do you get to have something for yourself, Mattie? Grace's words were like balm on a wound, soothing and sharp all at once. I had to let out a shaky breath, her words pushing through the cloud of doubt in my mind. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't crazy for wanting to be seen, for wanting to be heard. I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. You're stronger than you think, Mattie. Don't let them make you feel small anymore. You've done enough for them. Now it's time for you. Her voice was like a spark in the dark, lighting a fire inside me that I hadn't realized was there. I knew that Grace was right. I had been silent for too long, thinking my love and sacrifice would somehow fix everything. But it didn't. It only left me empty, tired, and ignored. It was time to stop hiding behind the walls of silence I had built over the years. A few days later, the family gathered again for a barbecue. The tension was palpable. I could feel it in the air, thick and uncomfortable, like the calm before a storm. Venice was there, of course, her face unreadable as she greeted me with a cool, forced smile. But something had shifted inside me. I was done shrinking back, done being the quiet one who took all the blame, all the disrespect. I wasn't that woman anymore. We sat at the table, eating in silence for a while. Then Venice spoke, her voice sharp as ever. "You know, you've really made a scene, Mom. This whole thing, it's just embarrassing. I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of nothing." My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it show. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room was on me now, and I felt the weight of the moment. The years of silence, the years of swallowing my hurt, were gone. "I'm not going to take this from you anymore, Venice. I've given my life to you all, sacrificed everything. And for what? To be treated like this? To be made to feel like I don't matter?" My voice was steady, but there was a power in it now, something I hadn't known I was capable of. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, here we go again with the drama." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. I stood there, my hands at my sides, my back straight, as I continued. "No, I'm not doing this anymore. I've spent too many years being patient, being quiet. I've sacrificed for you, for all of you, and I'm done being the invisible woman in my own life." The room was silent, except for the sound of my voice, filling the space with everything I had kept hidden for so long. Venice opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand. "No. This time, you're going to listen. I'm not asking for your respect, I'm demanding it." Her face reddened, and I could see the anger and frustration bubbling in her, but I didn't back down. Not this time. The family sat there, frozen in the awkward silence that followed, some watching, others shifting uncomfortably. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not anymore. The confrontation ended with Venice storming off, muttering something under her breath. The others began to disperse, some offering me half-hearted apologies, others pretending it hadn't happened. But I felt something shift inside me. It was like the storm had passed, and though there was wreckage left behind, I knew I had finally spoken my truth. The next morning, I woke up feeling the weight of it all, disappointed in the way things had turned out, unsure of what would happen next. But there was something else, too. A sense of freedom, of having reclaimed my own voice. This was the beginning of something new, and I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant facing it alone. As I looked out the window, the morning sun casting its light on the world outside, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to walk it. The weight of the days that followed the confrontation pressed heavily on me. I spent hours alone, sitting in silence, reflecting on the decision I had made. The house was quieter now, the air thick with tension. Every corner of this place reminded me of the years I spent holding my tongue, never asking for more than what I was given. For the first time, I was awake, truly awake, to the reality that I was no longer the passive mother. The time for silence had ended. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. The pain was still there, but so was something else, a deep sense of resolve that I couldn't ignore. The past few weeks had been nothing short of a storm, and now I stood in the calm before its aftermath. Was I ready for this? For the possible fallout, the inevitable distance that would form between me and my children? I didn't know. But I did know that standing silent in the shadows of my own life had cost me too much already. I had given up too many years. This This confrontation was the first step toward getting back what was mine. As I sat alone in the living room, I reflected on the years of mistreatment that had built up like a pressure cooker inside me. I had always been the strong one, the one who sacrificed for her family, the one who held everything together. But in the process, I had lost pieces of myself, pieces I could no longer afford to give away. A soft knock at the door broke my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I found a familiar face. Lola, a distant relative who had always been kind to me. She had watched from the sidelines as my family treated me with indifference, and I saw the concern in her eyes. "Mattie, how are you holding up?" she asked softly, stepping into the living room. I closed the door behind her, my throat tightening. "I've been better, Lola, but I'm making it through." "You've been strong, Mattie, stronger than most," she said, sitting down across from me. "But I know this has been hard." I nodded, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't often that I allowed myself to feel sorry for what I'd been through. But with Lola, it was different. She had seen me when I was at my best, and now she was seeing me when I was broken. She didn't judge me for it. "I just don't know if I did the right thing," I admitted. "This distance, this silence, it's like it's been building for years. I was so afraid of losing them. But I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know if I can fix it." Lola reached out, placing her hand over mine. "Mattie, you did what you had to do. You're not wrong for wanting respect, for wanting to be heard. The ones who truly love you will come around, and those who don't, they weren't meant to stay." Her words lingered in the room, filling the space with warmth and truth. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until now. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope flicker inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Venice's cold words echoed in my head. But now, I felt a new kind of power rising within me. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let the years of sacrifice define me any longer. The next step was clear. I needed to confront Venice head on, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The next morning, I called Venice. My heart raced as I heard her voice on the other end. "What's this about, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "We need to talk. I've let you disrespect me for too long, Venice. This is the last time." She scoffed. "Really? You're making a scene about this?" I stood my ground. "No, I'm not making a scene. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you how I've been treated. I've given my whole life to this family, and you've treated me like I don't matter." "You don't get to do that to me anymore." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to find the words to dismiss me, to make me small again. But this time, I wouldn't let her. "I'm done being the quiet one. You don't get to make me feel invisible anymore," I said, my voice steady but firm. "If you want to be a part of my life, you're going to treat me with respect. No more excuses." I waited for her response, but it never came. The line went silent. I knew she was angry, but that didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done, and I had finally drawn the line. The next day, as I sat with my family at dinner, the tension in the room was suffocating. Venice was there, her face tight, her eyes cold. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened, but I was no longer afraid of it. The conversation quickly turned into a confrontation. Venice's voice was sharp as she accused me of trying to tear the family apart. But I stood firm, refusing to back down. I reminded her of everything I had done for her, for all of them, and how it had never been enough. "Enough," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you, I deserve respect. I deserve more than this." The room was silent. No one spoke. Some of my other children looked uncomfortable, unsure of where to stand. But this wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. The conversation ended with Venice storming out, her parting words bitter. But I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I had taken the final stand, and for the first time in years, I knew I had done the right thing. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of everything that had happened on my shoulders. My heart was heavy, but there was no regret. I had found my voice, and that was worth more than any apology or reconciliation. As I walked outside, feeling the crisp morning air on my face, I looked up at the sky, the uncertainty of the future stretching before me. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going back. I was standing tall now, and nothing would make me shrink back into silence again. I could feel the tension hanging in the air as the days passed. The quiet that followed our last confrontation was suffocating, and I knew deep down that there was no going back. My decision to speak out had changed everything. The emotional weight of standing up for myself was overwhelming, but there was also something liberating about it. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of silence. The familiar ache in my chest was still there, but it no longer paralyzed me. I had spoken the truth, and now there was no escaping the consequences. The family I had always tried to hold together was unraveling before my eyes. I had never imagined that standing up for myself would come at such a high cost. I spent hours alone, reflecting on everything I had endured, years of being overlooked, dismissed, and taken for granted. I thought about the woman I used to be, the patient, silent mother who endured everything in the name of love. I used to tell myself that silence was a virtue, that enduring without complaint was a sign of strength. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, a way of allowing others to control me, to strip me of my dignity. But now, standing alone in my own space, I knew I could never go back to that version of myself. I had broken the silence, and there was no unbreaking it. The thought of facing my daughter again filled me with a mixture of fear and resolve. I was scared, yes, but I also knew I had to do this. I had to speak my truth, even if it meant losing everything. The phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid any more confrontation, but another part of me knew I couldn't run from this. I answered. Mattie? It was Lola, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a while. Yes, it's me, I said, my voice soft. I heard about what happened, Lola said, her voice gentle. I just wanted you to know, I'm proud of you. I've watched you for so long, always putting others first, and I know this isn't easy. But you're doing the right thing. I didn't know what to say. A lump formed in my throat as I realized how much I needed to hear those words. No one had ever acknowledged how hard it had been for me, how much I had sacrificed for everyone else. It felt like a burden had been lifted just by hearing Lola's words. Thank you, I whispered, feeling the tears welling up. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't go back. You don't have to go back, Mattie. You've stood your ground. You're stronger than you realize. Her words hit me hard, and I realized that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just enduring, I was standing tall. The next day, my daughter called. The moment had come. I took a deep breath before picking up the phone. Mom, Venice's voice was cold, distant. We need to talk. I had prepared for this moment, but hearing her voice still sent a shiver down my spine. We do, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. I've been quiet for too long, and I'm done. Venice scoffed. Oh, so now you're going to lecture me? You think I don't know how hard you've worked for this family? You've always used that to manipulate us. Her words stung. Manipulate? I repeated, my voice rising. I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone, doing everything I could to make sure everyone else was okay. And how have I been treated? Like I don't matter. Like I'm invisible. There was a long pause. You don't understand how hard things have been for me, Mom. You don't get it. No, I said, the calm in my voice betraying the storm inside me. You don't get it. I'm not invisible anymore, and I won't be silenced. Not by you. Not by anyone. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For the first time, Venice didn't have anything to say. I could feel the weight of the moment, the tension thick in the air. She didn't know what to do with me now, and I wasn't backing down. I ended the call, my heart racing, but there was no regret. I had said what needed to be said. And now, the ball was in her court. But the fallout came quickly. Venice didn't take kindly to being challenged. The next few days were filled with cold stares and strained conversations. The family had split, and I was caught in the middle. Some tried to reach out, others distanced themselves, but I was no longer afraid of being alone. In fact, I felt freer than I had in years. I sat in my living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. My heart ached with the loss, but there was a strange sense of peace that came with finally speaking up. I had never asked for more from my family than to be treated with respect, and yet, it had always been too much. Now, as I stood there alone, I knew I was no longer defined by their opinions. I wasn't their doormat. I wasn't the one who had to bear the weight of their expectations. I had reclaimed my voice, and no one could take that away from me. Later that evening, I received a message from another relative, someone I hadn't heard from in years. She had seen what was happening with my family, and for the first time, reached out to offer her support. I know it's been hard, Mattie, she said, but you've done something so powerful. Don't doubt yourself. You're stronger than you realize. And in that moment, I understood. The pain was real, the cost was high, but there was a strength in standing alone, a clarity that came from facing the truth head-on. The quiet weight of the silence in my home had grown unbearable. It had been days since that painful confrontation with my daughter, and the fractured relationships in my family hung heavily in the air. The words spoken in anger and hurt had settled, but the emotional wounds were still raw. Yet, despite the pain, a flicker of clarity had begun to emerge in the midst of it all. I had finally stood up for myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a choice, no longer trapped in silence, no longer living for everyone else's expectations. Sitting alone in my room, the harsh words from that night still echoed in my mind. But there was something different now. A shift. I could feel it, deep in my bones. I wasn't just replaying the past anymore. I was finally looking forward, even if I didn't know exactly what the future would hold. Would my daughter come back? Would she ever understand why I had to say what I did? I didn't know. But the question that kept running through my mind was this: what if this was the last conversation we ever had? There were flashes of moments from my past, times when I stayed silent, when I endured for the sake of others, when I put myself last. I used to think silence was strength, but now I realized it had only made me smaller, less visible. I could never go back to that place. I couldn't keep burying my own needs, my own pain, to protect others who didn't see me. The realization was sharp and clear. This was the beginning of a new chapter for me. And as the minutes ticked by, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that, no matter the cost, I could move beyond the past and reclaim my dignity. Just then, the phone rang. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The number on the screen told me everything. Venice. I took a deep breath before answering. Mom? Her voice was soft, hesitant. Can we talk? I stayed silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. My heart was pounding, but I steadied myself. Yes, we can talk. The conversation that followed was nothing like what I expected. It was strained, awkward, almost as if we were both treading carefully, unsure of what the other was truly feeling. She began by acknowledging some of the pain I had gone through, but it wasn't an apology, not directly anyway. Instead, she spoke of how hard everything had been for her too, how overwhelmed she had been. She mentioned the mistakes she made and how she was trying to juggle so much. I listened, but my mind couldn't help but analyze her every word. Was this real? Was this sincere? Or was it just another attempt to smooth things over? I didn't want to hear excuses, but I also didn't want to jump to conclusions. There was something in her voice, though, something that told me she wasn't ready to fully admit the depth of what she had done. But for the first time, I wasn't desperate for her to apologize. I wasn't looking for validation. This wasn't about me begging for love or recognition. I had done enough of that in my life. This was about me standing firm in my truth, no matter what. The conversation ended with a tentative suggestion from her. Maybe we should meet. We need to talk more, face to face. The words were a glimmer of hope, but I knew better than to expect everything to be fixed with one conversation. The wounds were deep, and healing was not going to be instant. Days later, the family gathered once more. Another holiday dinner, another attempt to pull everyone back into the same room. The air was thick with unspoken words. The tension between us all was palpable, but no one was willing to acknowledge it. I sat at the table, watching my family interact, their forced smiles and stiff conversation. It was like a game, one we'd all played too many times before. But I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't hiding behind pleasantries or pretending everything was fine. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "this isn't working. We keep avoiding the elephant in the room, but it's not going away. I can't be the only one willing to address it." Everyone froze. My daughter looked at me, her eyes a mixture of guilt and something I couldn't quite place. A glance passed between us, something unspoken, something shifting. "I'm not asking for apologies," I continued, "but I'm asking for respect. We can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. This is bigger than just me. This is about how we've all allowed this pattern to continue." There was no immediate response, no sudden resolution, but I could see something in my daughter's eyes. The walls were starting to come down, even if just a little. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The rest of the evening went by in a haze. I knew we weren't done. There was still work to be done, still healing to go through. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a ghost in my own family, forced to fade into the background. I had spoken my truth, and no one could take that away from me. Later, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I reflected on how far I had come. The family wasn't whole yet, and I wasn't fool enough to think everything would fall into place overnight. But I had faced the hardest part. I had taken a stand, and no matter where we went from here, I would never be that silent woman again. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of it.